The millionaire single dad was left speechless when the waitress transformed his disabled daughter's taps on the table into a melody, never imagining that tune would become a global hit, rescue a record label, and ignite the American street music movement. Hello to my amazing audience, get ready for a story that will move your heart. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel if you find yourself swept up in this journey, and leave a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. It's wonderful to see people from all around the world joining us today. Lucas Kane, the music millionaire once hailed as the golden touch of the recording industry, sat silently beside his daughter. Every arrangement he produced had turned unknown artists into sensations. But faced with the little girl in that wheelchair, he was utterly powerless. Mia, 10 years old, suffered from spastic cerebral palsy, unable to speak or interact like other children. Yet those tiny hands held a strange gift, the power to tap rhythms. Movements that seemed unconscious were in fact the only language Mia used to communicate with the world. Lucas had watched his daughter tap on surfaces for years. He'd lost count of how many times he'd hoped it was a signal away to understand her. The rickety table at the diner was just a brief stop after a long day. Lucas set down the menu, his mind adrift. Then he heard it. Mia's tapping, but this time something was different. Structure. Emotion, as though she strove to convey something. The rhythm wasn't random. It felt familiar enough to stop Lucas's heart. He leaned in. The taps grew into a simple yet profound melody. He recognized it but couldn't recall where. Something in that tempo awakened a memory he'd buried in a distant performance night, amid strangely reworked folk tunes. The moment peaked when the server approached, a young woman poised and calm, holding her order pad. But as soon as she heard Mia's taps, she froze. No greeting, no taking orders, she simply stood, eyes fixed on those small hands. Lucas noticed. The girl wasn't just listening, she was responding. Unconsciously, her fingers tapped the same rhythm Mia played. A strange synchrony bloomed between two strangers, as if they shared a secret composition only they knew. Unease and excitement welled in Lucas's chest. He pieced it together. His daughter, with cerebral palsy and no access to rare recordings, was precisely reproducing a melody the server had composed years ago. No one else had ever known that tune, and now Mia expressed it as if she'd lived with it forever. No one spoke. No words were needed. In that moment, Lucas understood something had shifted. Mia wasn't merely echoing rhythms, she was revealing a message. A cry for help, a connection, a memory that didn't belong to just one person. Lucas didn't know how or why Mia could resurrect unreleased music, but he knew one thing clearly: this coincidence couldn't be chance. A secret lay hidden between melody and memory, and Mia was the fragile yet powerful bridge. In that instant, among three seemingly unrelated souls, an invisible song began to take shape. Without speakers or instruments, just steady taps and a heart tuned enough to recognize that music still lives, not on a glittering stage, but in the silent spaces of our lives. Lucas, who had conquered the industry with his creative touches, now faced an arrangement beyond his control. And precisely for that reason, he realized, perhaps, for the first time in years, this wasn't music to make money. This was music to save. From the moment Mia's small hands struck that strange melody, Lucas could no longer shake the feeling that something was waiting to be unveiled. Those sound simple yet haunting not only awakened the dormant musical instinct within him, but also opened a mysterious door toward the young waitress. A woman unnamed in his life, who had crossed his path for only a few seconds, yet responded to Mia as if they shared a language long forgotten. Lucas did not ask directly. He watched and listened, then sought out the diner's manager, an older man, whose careful speech belied eyes that lit up when he spoke of Kendall. She had been a top student in Vanderbilt's music department, a rare talent, with deep emotional breadth, especially passionate about Memphis blues, the very music Lucas had pursued at his peak. But Kendall never graduated. Everything collapsed one rainy night when her brother died in a horrific car accident. From that moment, Kendall withdrew from the stage. She left school and vanished from the music world. Her dreams shattered not for lack of ability, but because a piece of her soul had been buried with her brother, the only person who ever believed her music could heal. No one heard her play anymore. No one saw her compose. Only she remained, in her white apron, in this small diner hiding as if her artist's life had never existed. Lucas went still. There was something weighty in that story. Not only Kendall's past, but his own losses mirrored it. Both had once stood on the brink of glory, only to fall. Yet Miatha girl, carrying that unreleased melody, seemed, in some inexplicable way, to be bridging those broken pieces. He did not force the moment. Only a gentle question at the end of his meal, as Kendall removed her apron and prepared to leave. Lucas mentioned the rhythm from the day before. He need not say more. Kendall understood. She fell silent for a long time, then reached into her bag and produced a worn notebook, the pages yellowed with age. No one had touched that notebook for years. It was Kendall's sole remaining legacy, the part she had hidden as if opening it would unleash the past. But tonight, for reasons she could not name, Kendall opened it. On one of the final pages, rhythmic notations were scrawled densely in black ink, the very pattern Mia had tapped exactly, not a beat off. Kendall's hands trembled as she flipped through. Confusion shadowed her face. This was not mere coincidence. It was a crack of fissure that allowed memories to pour in. Nights composing with her brother, sound experiments beside an old guitar, melodies left incomplete for lack of chance to finish them. She did not want to return. She feared the music would summon every loss she had buried. She feared she was no longer the person she once was. Yet precisely because of that, Kendall felt Lucas's despair more acutely than anyone, the lone father desperate for any way to reach his daughter's locked heart. And Miatha child tapping the forgotten melody in that notebook was the clarion call, the question only Kendall herself could answer. There was no persuasion, no performance, only a sustained silence in which two broken souls faced one another and confronted their hidden truths. Kendall nodded, a small gesture, but enough to change everything. She agreed, not for Lucas, nor solely for Mia, but for herself, a part of her long asleep, now awakened by the taps of a girl who could not speak her own words. And so, three people, a music millionaire on the brink of losing all, a child living in silent isolation, and a forgotten talent, began to write a song no one had ever heard, yet one that seemed to have echoed within them all along. Lucas did not rush. He let a few days pass before sending Kendall an invitation. No pressure, no urgency, just a small note bearing the Memphis studio address and a simple line, "There's a little corner for Mia if you'd like to come." Then he waited. When Kendall stepped into the studio, the space was almost motionless. She carried an air of hesitation, yet her eyes shone brighter than before. Mia had been set up in her own small area, nothing elaborate, just a basic upright piano, a tiny recording microphone affixed near the wheelchair's armrest, and a small table covered with a few blank sheets of paper. Lucas did not enter. He stood silently in the hallway outside, allowing Kendall and his daughter to connect without interference. Kendall sat down beside Mia, making no introductions or small talk. She simply placed her hand gently on the tabletop, then tapped 3 slow beats. Then she stopped. No explanation, just waiting. At first, Mia withdrew into herself, her gaze distant, her body trembling slightly. But then, as if stirred by a gentle breeze, her tiny fingers began to respond, tentative, uncertain, yet undeniably there. A short sequence of taps rang out. Kendall said nothing. She simply drew her pen and hurriedly notated on the paper, as though afraid to miss a single moment. Day by day, Mia opened up. She began to initiate rhythms herself, no longer isolated taps, but emotionally charged, intentional rhythmic patterns. Sometimes she produced little melodic fragments, almost primitive, yet imbued with the spirit of ancient tales, echoes of southern blues, the breath of folk legends once told by hearth fires. Kendall recognized them not only by her skill but by feeling. She recorded as though rediscovering a lost language. Mia smiled, a faint, shimmering smile, but genuine. No one spoke at that moment, yet the entire room held its breath. For from a child who once offered no response to the world, Mia now used music to assert her presence, to be seen and heard. Kendall began teaching Mia how to speak through rhythm. She introduced simple rhythmic patterns corresponding to emotions: joy, sorrow, desire, need, memory, fear. Mia learned slowly, but once accustomed, she replicated them with astonishing precision. The taps ceased to be mere reactions, they became words. Music was not only Mia's sole language but the bridge between her and the world. One late afternoon, as Kendall reviewed her notes, she paused. There was a rhythmic sequence Mia had created, not random improvisation, but a clear structure. Kendall pieced it together, tweaked it slightly, added a piano accompaniment and a simple bass line. In under 10 minutes, she held in hand a brief composition unadorned, yet strangely moving. Instantly, Kendall knew this was exactly the material Lucas had been searching for all along. Lucas was struggling with his artists at the label. Streaming had changed everything. Complex arrangements and catchy hooks were no longer enough to hold listeners. The market demanded something else, a raw, unfiltered emotion, and that little piece born in this studio, imbued with the unvarnished soul of Memphis, created by a mute child, was precisely that. Kendall said nothing to Lucas that night. But later, as he happened to stand outside the glass door and looked in, he saw Mia tapping lightly on the tabletop, her eyes fixed on Kendall as if she were the compass of her soul. And Kendall, her hair loose, one hand flipping music pages, lips pressed as though humming an unwritten melody, was no longer the waitress huddled behind the coffee counter. She was the musician, the guide. Lucas felt his chest tighten, not in pain, but in fullness, as if an invisible thread were stitching together the cracks in his heart. For years he had chased career success, power, metrics. But here, in this small room where two broken souls were creating something pure, he remembered why he began, not to dominate the music market, but to touch the deepest places of the human heart. Kendall was not only helping Mia make music, she was helping the little girl live and unwittingly awakening the part of Lucas's own soul that had long lain dormant. Dear viewers, take a moment to relax or grab a sip of water, then stay tuned for more astonishing developments. Comment. Number 1. If you're enjoying the story, so we know you're still with us. Lucas couldn't recall exactly when he began to wait for Kendall to arrive at the studio each day. Perhaps it was after the first time she pressed her ear to Mia's hands to feel the rhythm, or when she sketched a rhythmic map in symbols he had never seen yet that made Mia smile. Every time Kendall leaned over to take notes, a touch of ink at her cheekbone, he saw in her more than a musician. She was someone who listened to what no one else could hear, who could name an emotion through the tiny taps of a child's closed-off hands. He had faced countless talents, witnessed performances bathed in spotlights and million-dollar handshakes, but none had ever made Lucas pause like Kendall. There was something in her both fragile and relentless, like an ancient, forgotten melody whispering on the wind. When Mia began to perfect the transition between phrases, Kendall proposed an idea. Her voice was low, her eyes bright, her hand resting on the score as if holding a heartbeat. She suggested they record that piano as a side project, but as a genuine hit, a proper release. One final effort to save Lucas's wavering label from the indifferent tide of streaming. Lucas remained silent. His mind spun with numbers from the investors' warnings. Pull funding, artists departing, flawless arrangements no one wanted anymore. And now, a melody born from the hands of a child with cerebral palsy, guided by a woman who'd buried her own dream. Could that possibly be enough to turn things around? He looked at Mia. She was watching Kendall, her fingers tapping lightly into the air as if chasing a sound only she could hear. And when Lucas met Kendall's gaze, he saw not recklessness but a quiet conviction. A flame not blinding, but warm enough to fill the room. Lucas nodded, not from logic, but from something deeper, the feeling of being pulled back from the brink. That night, they sat together refining the rhythm, phrases that felt disjointed, gaps that needed life rather than theory. Kendall leaned close, her elbow brushing his as she turned a page. They said nothing, yet their closeness unfolded slowly, like an instrumental piece rising toward its climax. When the arrangement neared completion, Lucas turned to thank her. He brushed her hand, a simple, uncalculated gesture, pure instinct. The moment stretched. She did not withdraw. Their eyes held each other in silence longer than a single breath, and then, as naturally as music itself, they leaned in. A soft kiss, the two final notes closing an opening movement. But immediately after, Kendall froze. She pulled back, her gaze averted, voice thick as if swallowing itself. The words were brief but carried all the panic she'd hidden. "I can't let myself fail again." Then she walked away, no waiting for Lucas's reply, no glance back. Her figure receded down the hallway like an unfinished coda in an incomplete piece. The next day, Mia stopped tapping. Not from fatigue or sadness, just silence. A strange, profound quiet so that Lucas felt the world around him empty. He tried to name what was lost, but the harder he tried, the more he realized. It was Kendall who had opened the door of music for Mia. And when she withdrew, Mia retreated back into the world no one else could enter. Lucas said nothing, but he understood. That melody was not the product of strategy or intellect. It was the crystallization of three souls: a child craving connection, a man with a fractured heart, and a woman still afraid of music as she was of her own memories. Remove one, and it all collapses. And now Lucas knew, to save the song, he must save Kendall. Not for his career, but for his own heart, which, for the first time in years, stirred with something far more real than success. Lucas did not let go. Even though Kendall had stepped back, and Mia had fallen silent as if nothing had ever begun, something inside him refused to cool. Some songs cannot be forgotten. Some people must be returned to where they belong, even if they no longer believe they deserve it. One early morning, Lucas brought Mia back to the old diner, not for coffee or bread, but simply to stand once more where it all began. Kendall was bent over wiping a table, her hair tied high, movements so familiar it seemed she belonged to this stillness. But when the soft tap sounded from Mia's table, every motion in Kendall froze. Mia's hands thought to have ceased responding to the world now produced steady beats, neither fast nor hurried, but gentle and yearning, like a call to return. Kendall stood stock still. Her eyes widened, and for the first time since their separation, life seemed to blaze in her gaze. Before Kendall could speak, Lucas's phone buzzed, a message from the label's executive office. Mia's song had reached several major producers. They wanted immediate release rights, provided the track could be finalized within 48 hours. No edits, no delays. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Lucas knew he could not do this without Kendall, and neither could Mia. Kendall held the phone, her gaze lingering on the notification. Her fingers trembled not from worry over the music's quality, but because her past was unsettled. Unfinished attempts, unreleased recordings, her late brother's watchful eyes, it all rushed back like a cold wind down the nape of her neck. But then she looked at Mia waiting, silent yet full of hope, and in that moment, Kendall understood that some fears can only be overcome by facing them, not by avoiding them. The recording session took place the next afternoon. The studio was busier than usual. No longer the small private corner, it was now an open stage, with an audience, investors, and faces that once doubted Lucas. They wanted to see what really lay behind the name, the Song of the Speechless Child. Mia was brought in, still in her wheelchair, before the microphone set at her reach. Kendall stood beside her, not the quiet waitress of old, but a true conductor. No script, no extra microphone-esh, used only her eyes, her hands, and gentle cues to guide Mia through the melody. At first, the room was silent. No one knew if the child could respond under such pressure. Then the first tap sounded soft, brimming with feeling, and followed by an imperfect yet haunting rhythmic chain. Kendall raised the tempo, keeping the melody unbroken. Mia followed her every move, as though they spoke not in words but in music. Outside, Lucas's fists clenched, his throat dry. But when the second phrase rang out, the very passage Mia had played in that late-night studio session, the entire room erupted. Some bowed their heads. There were sighs, and then tears. No one expected a simple composition, born of a disabled child's taps, to carry such weight. It lacked complexity or technical flourish, yet spoke volumes of loneliness, the thirst for connection, and the fragile beauty of incomplete things. The track was finished in a single take, no edits, no post-production. Within hours of being shared online, the recording from that session spread like an undercurrent. Comments poured in more than praise, genuine emotion. The media called it America's voiceless song from the soul. Streaming platforms vied for rights, and Lucas's label, thought to be on its last breath, reawakened with new strength. On the launch night, before hundreds of eyes fixed on the stage, Lucas approached Kendall. He did not face the crowd or make grand congratulations. He simply leaned in and whispered, "You didn't just save the label, you saved our souls." Kendall turned away, saying nothing, but tears streamed down her face, spilled through the first smile she no longer hid. Amid the swelling applause like rolling waves, she knew the passion she once lost had returned, not quietly, but burning brighter than ever. Lucas stood in the familiar recording studio, the place where a speechless little girl first tapped out a melody that made the whole world listen. Gone were the glaring lights, the cameras, and the bustle of the album launch. Only the sound of breath remained, the warm scent of wood from the piano, and that clear sense that something was finally beginning the right way. Mia sat in her wheelchair, her cheeks flushed with a quiet joy. In her hand was a small drumstick carved from a piece of wood taken from the studio's old pianoa gift Mia had prepared for Kendall herself. Taped to its side was a trembling scrap of paper, written in childlike letters, "Because you heard me." Kendall held the gift in both hands, cherishing it as if it were an untitled composition. She was no longer wearing the white apron that once hid her talent. Today she wore a simple yet sturdy vest, a reflection of her mended spirit. Her eyes were still deep, but now they burned not with fatigue, but with the flame of a passion rekindled and guided by something greater than herself. Lucas stepped forward and gently reached into his jacket pocket. He withdrew a small object, a silver-plated pin engraved with a musical note whose curve echoed the bend of the Mississippi River. A modest symbol, yet one carrying the full journey they'd shared from that first tap in the tiny diner to a global hit that transcended every boundary. He offered the pin to Kendall, his gaze unwavering, voice thick with emotion. "Together we will spread Mia's melody." Kendall said nothing. She pinned it to her lapel, a simple act yet brimming with ceremony. As though every moment of her life, every failure and every wound, had finally found its purpose. She nodded. No words needed, that single nod was her vow. Before long, they founded a non-profit music studio. No charts, no chasing trends. A place for children who had never been heard, never been named, yet carried within them melodies waiting to be set free. Mia became their first composer, not just a symbol, but the real voice and heart of the project. The music Mia created with Kendall became a global sensation, not through grand marketing, but through its unspoken authenticity. Children from hospitals, orphanages, and special schools sent in thousands of tapping recordings, raw sounds brimming with hope. From Harlem's street corners to Chicago's soul cathedrals, from Georgia's red brick stoops to Austin's outdoor stages, Mia's story inspired artists who feared their creativity was spent. Any profits from the hit were not divided among shareholders, but used to fund music scholarships for disabled children. Small classes opened, where instructors taught not from textbooks, but by listening. And where music began not with chords, but with the question, "What story do you want to tell?" One late afternoon, as the breeze drifted through the studio window, Mia tapped out a new rhythm. No one translated its meaning, no one needed to. For her eyes said it all. This was a prelude. A new chapter forming from the very melody she was composing for tomorrow. Lucas stood beside Kendall. Their hands did not touch, yet their hearts were bound by an invisible thread. The three of them, Mia, Kendall, and Lucas, were no longer three lost souls who'd stumbled together over a melody. They had become a team, a unified whole. Living proof that music, when understood by the heart, can heal every fracture, old and new alike. Within America's legacy of blues and soul born of pain, yet always singing of hope, their story was but a single note. Yet it was a genuine note, sounded at the right moment, in the right place. And the deepest legacy they left behind was not the hit, nor the studio, but the lesson. Every child carries a melody waiting to be heard. All that's needed is someone patient enough to listen. Their story is not over, for each new song is a new chapter. The story of Lucas, Kendall, and Mia is not just a journey of music, it is a journey of healing, of faith reborn from places once thought beyond light. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest miracles do not arise from perfection, but from fragments that learn to form a new whole. Music needs no words when the heart is sincere. And every child, no matter the flaws, the pain, or the silence they carry, holds a melody worthy of being heard. If this story has moved you, sparked empathy, instilled hope, or simply brushed against your memories, please leave a comment below. Share this video with someone who needs reminding that dreams never truly die. They only wait for the right person to awaken them. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss the next story of songs yet unsung, hearts yet unspoken, because who knows, the next chapter might just be yours.